They built her in winter. The Brooklyn Navy Yard smelled of salt, oil, and sweat. Men worked through the cold, sparks falling around them like fiery snow. They didn't talk much about glory. They talked about paychecks, about wives waiting at home, about the price of meat going up again. But in every hammer strike, in every welded seam, there was a quiet kind of faith that what they were building would mean something. They called her Helena, after a quiet city on the far side of the continent. At first, she was just steel, cold, silent, a set of numbers on a drawing board. But as her hull rose against the river's edge, she began to take shape, and then somehow a kind of soul. When the workers saw her slide into the water for the first time, they said she looked fast, even while standing still. The newspapers called her a new light cruiser, but the men who built her just said, "She's a good one. She'll bring our boys home." By 1939, the world had already started to crack. Europe was burning. The Pacific was watching. And Helena was finally ready. Her first crew came aboard in pressed blues and nervous smiles. Boys, mostly, some barely out of school. Farm sons, machinists, dreamers. They learned her hauls, her smell, the rhythm of her engines. They laughed too loud, got seasick too fast, and wrote letters that began with "Dear Mom." On a bright morning, she sailed south for her first long voyage, to Uruguay. The crew leaned over the rails to watch the waves, unaware they were staring into the future. In Montevideo, they saw the wreck of the Admiral Graf Spee, the German cruiser that had scuttled itself after the Battle of the River Plate. Its blackened hull sat half-sunk, smoke-stained and silent. One sailor whispered, "Looks like a ghost." Another said, "Maybe that's how we'll end up." They laughed, but none of them really thought it was funny. By late 1940, Helena joined the Pacific Fleet. Pearl Harbor became home. The sky was endless blue, the ocean calm. The drills went on. The days blurred together. Target practice, night watch, cleaning brass. A quiet before a storm no one could see. The morning began like any other. A few men on deck joked about breakfast. The air smelled of coffee and seaweed. Then the sirens began. From the north, a dark shape appeared. Then another, then a dozen more. Torpedo bombers flying low. One sailor said later it sounded like angry bees. At 7:58, Helena's world turned upside down. The torpedo hit her starboard side, tearing open her belly. Men in the engine rooms were thrown from their stations. Boiler room 2 filled with fire before anyone could scream. The blast tore through decks, cables, lungs. The mine layer Oglala, tied alongside her, rolled and began to capsize. For a moment, Helena seemed to follow, but she didn't. Power failed. Smoke filled the quarters. Then, deep inside the ship, someone cranked the backup generator. Lights flickered. Guns came alive. And Helena fired back. Her gunners, choking on oil fumes, opened up on the attacking planes. 5-inch shells, 1.1-inch Chicago pianos, and .50 calibers. The air filled with shrapnel and rage. She hit at least 6 planes before the attack was over. When the smoke cleared, 26 men were dead, 60 wounded, but the ship still floated. Later, one survivor wrote in his journal, "She bled from the hull, but she never sank. Maybe she just didn't want to die with us inside." They patched her up like a wounded animal. At Mare Island, welders carved away burned metal and replaced it with new. The shipyard crews called her Lucky Helena, but the men who'd served aboard her didn't believe in luck anymore. By the summer of 1942, she was whole again. Faster, stronger, meaner. New radar, new guns, new scars. She went to war with something heavy in her bones. Her new captain, Robert English, was a quiet man. He told the crew, "We've already been to hell. The rest is easy." October 1942, the Solomon Islands. The jungle smelled of rot and cordite. Every night, the Japanese sent ships down the slot, a narrow channel where moonlight was a death sentence. Helena joined Task Force 64 under Admiral Norman Scott. For days, radar drills, night gunnery, silence. Then, on the night of October 11th, the radar lit up. Enemy ships, closing fast. Scott hesitated. He couldn't see them yet. But Helena could. Her operators saw the blips clear as day. Captain Hoover, impatient, calculating, asked permission to fire. The answer came muddled. Roger. He took it as a yes. At 23:46, Helena's gun spoke. 6-inch shells screamed across the dark. Within seconds, the Japanese cruiser Aoba was on fire. The destroyer Fubuki vanished in smoke. Then Furutaka exploded, torpedoes cooking off in a chain of white fire. The men in Helena's turrets worked like a machine. Shell casings rolled at their feet. Sweat stung their eyes. They didn't know they just helped win America's first night surface victory of the war. They just knew they were still alive. When morning came, the sea was littered with oil and splintered wood. Helena drifted through it silent, her gun still warm, her crew exhausted. They didn't cheer, they just watched the water. A month later, the war came calling again. Guadalcanal, the night of November 13th, 1942, a night sailors would later call the blackest in history. Helena's radar found the Japanese first, 2 battleships in a swarm of destroyers. But confusion reigned. Admiral Callahan's orders were scattered, his formations broken. Helena's men could see enemy ships through the mist. They could smell them. Still, they waited for orders that didn't come. Finally, the Japanese destroyer Akatsuki turned on its searchlight, and in that single flash of white, the battle began. Helena's guns roared point blank. The first salvo hit Akatsuki amidships, tearing her in two. Other destroyers charged through the chaos, and Helena's turrets pivoted like living things. Fire, reload. Fire, shells found their marks. Metal screamed. When it was over, the sea was glowing with burning oil. Helena had survived again. 1 man dead, dozens wounded. But Admiral Callahan was gone, his flagship destroyed. The survivors looked around at the wreckage, friend and foe, and realized the sea had earned its name, Iron Bottom Sound. After the battle, the crew was hollow-eyed. They didn't speak much. They fixed what they could, buried what they couldn't. In Sydney, Australia, for a few brief weeks, they lived like men again. Clean uniforms, fresh fruit, laughter in the bars by the harbor. But when orders came to return to the Solomon Islands, no one complained. They just packed their gear, taped photos of sweethearts above their bunks, and went back to sea. By spring 1943, Helena was part of Task Force 68 under Rear Admiral Walden Ainsworth. Her guns, refitted, rebored, restless. Her men, veterans now. Each shell-loaded felt personal. They bombarded Munda and Vila, clearing jungle strongholds, supporting Marines they'd never meet. Helena was no longer a cruiser. She was a rhythm, a pulse in the Pacific night. July 5th, 1943, Independence Day. The moon hung bright and full over Kula Gulf, turning the sea silver. Too bright for comfort. Helena's crew knew what that meant. Visibility. Death. Just past midnight, radar picked up movement. 10 Japanese destroyers slipping through the dark like sharks. Admiral Akiyama's force, carrying reinforcements. At 1:57, Helena opened fire. Her guns flashed white, rapid, relentless. She hit the Japanese flagship Niizuki. Direct hits, but firing with regular repeater instead of flashless gave her away. Every burst lit her up like a beacon. The enemy saw her now. At 2:03, 3 long lance torpedoes struck. The first ripped through her bow, the second and third slammed beneath her armor belt. The deck rose, split, twisted. Steam, smoke, screams, power gone, lights gone. Captain Cecil gave the order no sailor ever wants to hear. Abandoned ship. Even as she broke in half, her aft turrets kept firing. Men at the guns refused to leave. They fired until the barrels dipped below the sea. When the shooting stopped, Helena was gone. Only her bow and stern remained, floating separately like ghosts. Hundreds of men were in the water. Some clung to debris, some prayed, some sang. The destroyers Nicholas and Radford came back through the smoke, searchlights off, risking everything. They hauled in 700 men through the night, but as dawn came, they had to withdraw. Japanese planes were on the way. They left behind hundreds more, floating in the endless blue. For 2 days, the survivors drifted, sunburned, thirsty, half mad. Sharks circled. Men whispered names of wives and children. A few slipped beneath the water without a sound. A group of 88 men washed ashore on Vela La Vela, a Japanese-held island. Locals found them, Solomon Islanders, and hid them in the jungle, risking their lives. They fed them coconuts and rainwater. At night, they whispered, "Americans safe." Japanese no find. A week later, U.S. destroyers returned in secret. In the dark, under the watch of enemy patrols, they pulled 165 men to safety. It was the last miracle Helena had left to give. Helena rests 2,800 feet below Kula Gulf now. When explorers found her in 2018, her hull number, 50, was still visible on the stern. Her turrets remained trained outward, as if still standing guard. The men who survived grew old. They had families, jobs, quiet lives. But when they spoke of Helena, their eyes changed. They didn't talk about battles, they talked about moments. A laugh during night watch, a hand on a shoulder after an explosion, a song played on the mess deck when the war felt endless. They said she was more than steel. They said she was home. And maybe that's why, after all the years, the ocean still whispers her name. Helena, the ship that wouldn't let go.